Billionaire laughs at Black Waitress's dress, then he finds out who she really is. What if a single moment of cruelty could change 2 lives forever? That's exactly what happened on a rainy Thursday evening at Marcus Fine Dining, when 35-year-old Denise Williams smoothed down her slightly faded black uniform and took a deep breath before approaching table 12. She'd been working double shifts for 3 months now, trying to save every penny she could. Her dress had seen better days. The fabric was worn thin at the seams and had lost some of its original color from countless washes, but it was clean and pressed with care. At table 12 sat Richard Blackstone, a man whose net worth exceeded some small country's budgets. His designer suit probably cost more than Denise made in 6 months. As she approached with her notepad, her worn shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor, she had no idea that this encounter would unravel a secret that had been buried for decades. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Denise had been working at Marcus Fine Dining for 8 years, and she knew every regular customer by name. She remembered their favorite meals, their usual drinks, and even asked about their families. The other staff members respected her quiet dignity and the way she handled even the most difficult customers with grace. Her manager, Tom, often said she was the backbone of the restaurant. But tonight felt different. Richard Blackstone wasn't just any wealthy customer. He was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room, and tonight he'd brought 2 business associates with him. As Denise approached their table, she could hear fragments of their conversation about a merger worth hundreds of millions. Richard was in the middle of explaining something when he noticed her standing there patiently, waiting for a pause in their discussion. His eyes immediately went to her uniform, taking in the faded fabric and the small mend near the pocket where she kept her pens. A smirk crossed his face as he looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "Gentlemen," Richard said to his companions, not bothering to lower his voice, "this is exactly what I mean about standards declining everywhere. Look at this uniform. It's practically falling apart. How can a restaurant expect to maintain its reputation when the staff looks like they've been dressed from a thrift store?" His associates chuckled uncomfortably, glancing at Denise with embarrassed expressions. Denise felt her cheeks burn, but she maintained her composure. She'd heard worse comments before, though none had stung quite like this. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Denise, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" Her voice was steady and professional, despite the humiliation she felt. Richard leaned back in his chair, still amused by his own cruelty. "I suppose we'll have to make do with what we've got," he said dismissively. 3 scotch and sodas. Top shelf, naturally, assuming you know what that means." The casual cruelty in his voice made even his business associates shift uncomfortably in their seats. As Denise walked away to get their drinks, she didn't notice the way Richard's eyes lingered on her face, something nagging at the back of his mind. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place. Throughout the evening, Richard's comments continued. When Denise brought their appetizers, he made a show of inspecting the plates before she could set them down. "I hope the food quality is better than the service presentation," he remarked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. When she accidentally brushed against his chair while serving dessert, he actually pulled out his phone and made a theatrical gesture of checking his expensive watch. But Denise handled each insult with quiet dignity. She'd learned long ago that some people's cruelty said more about them than about her. What Richard didn't know was that she'd been saving every tip, every extra dollar, for a reason that went far deeper than just making ends meet. She was putting herself through nursing school, attending classes during the day and working nights at the restaurant. Her dream was to become a pediatric nurse, to help children the way someone had helped her when she was young and alone. Other customers began to notice Richard's behavior. An elderly couple at a nearby table looked uncomfortable, and the woman actually caught Denise's eye and smiled warmly at her, mouthing, "I'm sorry," when Richard wasn't looking. The restaurant's atmosphere grew tense as other diners became aware of the situation. As the evening wound down, Richard's business associates excused themselves early, clearly uncomfortable with his behavior. Richard remained alone at the table, ordering another drink. That's when it happened. Denise was clearing the table next to his when her worn shoe caught on the carpet edge. She stumbled slightly, and instinctively reached out to steady herself, her hand briefly touching Richard's shoulder. The moment their eyes met, something shifted in Richard's expression. The arrogant smirk faded, replaced by a look of confusion and then something that might have been recognition. Denise saw the change and felt an odd flutter of unease. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "Wait," Richard said quietly, his voice completely different from the mocking tone he'd used all evening. He stared at her face intently, his brow furrowed. "What's your last name? If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." But Denise was already walking away, and Richard was left staring after her, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in his mind. Richard couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Denise's face, the way she'd held herself with dignity despite his cruelty, and most of all, something about her eyes that seemed achingly familiar. He found himself pacing his penthouse apartment, trying to push away a memory he'd buried for 35 years. The next morning, Richard did something he'd never done before. He returned to the restaurant during the day shift. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down, he knew it was something much more unsettling. He needed to know her full name, needed to confirm or dismiss the terrible possibility that was keeping him awake. Tom, the manager, was surprised to see such a prominent customer during lunch hours. "Mr. Blackstone, what brings you in today?" "The waitress from last night, Denise." "What's her last name?" Richard tried to keep his voice casual, but there was an urgency he couldn't hide. "Denise Williams. She's one of our best. Been with us 8 years. Tom paused, studying Richard's face. "Is everything all right, sir? I hope there wasn't any issue with her service." "Williams." Richard felt the world tilt around him. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself, his face going pale. Did she ever talk about her family? Her background? Tom looked puzzled by the strange questions. "Not much. I know she's putting herself through nursing school. Works incredibly hard. I believe she mentioned once that she was raised by her grandmother after her parents died when she was young." "Why do you ask?" Richard's hand was shaking now. Parents died when she was young. Raised by grandmother. The age was right, she'd be exactly 35 now. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and searched for something he'd tried to forget existed. After a few minutes, he found it, an old newspaper article from 35 years ago about a car accident. A young couple killed, leaving behind a newborn daughter who went to live with relatives. The couple's names were Michael and Sarah Williams. Their daughter's name was Denise. Richard sank into the nearest chair, the phone nearly slipping from his numb fingers. The cruel irony hit him like a physical blow. He'd spent the entire evening mocking and humiliating his own daughter, the child he'd abandoned when she was just 6 months old, the daughter he'd never tried to find, never tried to help. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. The restaurant around him seemed to fade away as Richard faced the devastating truth of what he'd done. Richard spent the next 3 days in agony, researching everything he could about Denise's life. What he discovered broke his heart completely. After the car accident that killed her adoptive parents when she was 2, she'd been raised by her elderly grandmother in a small apartment across town. Her grandmother had passed away when Denise was 17, leaving her completely alone. She'd worked her way through high school, taking odd jobs to survive, and had been supporting herself ever since. All these years, while Richard built his empire and lived in luxury, his daughter had been struggling just miles away, working multiple jobs, wearing second-hand clothes, and fighting for every opportunity. The daughter he'd abandoned had grown up to be everything he wasn't: kind, hard-working, dignified, and selfless. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after their first encounter, Richard returned to Marcus Fine Dining. But this time, he came with a purpose. He'd barely slept in days, wrestling with how to approach the most important conversation of his life. How do you tell someone you're their father after spending an evening treating them with casual cruelty? Denise was surprised to see him back. She approached his table with the same professional composure, though her eyes showed a flicker of wariness. "Good evening, Mr. Blackstone. Will anyone be joining you tonight?" "Please," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please sit down. I need to talk to you." The arrogance was completely gone from his demeanor. He looked older, vulnerable, and genuinely distressed. Denise hesitated. "I'm working, sir. I can't really." "Denise Williams," Richard interrupted gently. "Raised by your grandmother, Emma Williams, after your adoptive parents Michael and Sarah died in a car accident when you were 2 years old." He watched her face go pale. "Born on March 15, 35 years ago." Denise's hand went to her throat. "How do you know that? How could you possibly know?" Richard pulled out a faded photograph from his wallet, a picture he'd carried for decades but never looked at. It showed a much younger version of himself with a beautiful young woman holding a baby. "Because," he said, his voice breaking, "that baby is you, and I'm your biological father." The photograph fluttered from Denise's numb fingers to the floor. Around them, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, but their world had stopped completely. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. But nothing could have prepared either of them for what would happen next. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity. Denise stared at the photograph on the floor, then at Richard's face, seeing her own eyes reflected back at her. The resemblance was undeniable now that she knew what to look for. The same stubborn chin, the same way of holding their head when thinking deeply. "You left me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You left me when I was 6 months old." Richard nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I was 22 and terrified. Your mother, my girlfriend at the time, she died in childbirth. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle you. I signed the papers and disappeared." He looked up at her with desperate eyes. "I've regretted it every single day for 35 years. Denise sat down slowly, her legs suddenly weak. "All those years, I wondered who you were. Grandmother used to show me the one photo she had of you and tell me that someday I might meet you." She laughed bitterly. "I never imagined it would be like this." "I don't expect forgiveness," Richard said quickly. "How could I? I spent last week mocking you, humiliating you, when I should have been proud. You've accomplished more with your strength and character than I ever have with all my money. You're becoming a nurse to help children. You're everything good that I'm not." Denise looked at this broken wealthy man who was her father, and felt something unexpected stirring in her heart. Not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. "Why did you come back?" "Because when I saw your face, something in me recognized you. And when I learned the truth, I realized I'd been given a miracle, a chance to know the daughter I threw away." Richard's voice grew stronger. "I can't undo the past, Denise. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be worthy of being your father now." Over the following months, they met regularly for coffee, slowly building a relationship built on honesty rather than obligation. Richard quietly paid for her nursing school, not as charity, but as a father's duty he was finally fulfilling. When Denise graduated, he was in the audience, watching with tears of pride as she received her degree. The worn dress that had started it all was retired, but Denise kept it as a reminder that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest pain. Richard learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love and respect of the people who matter most. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us on this journey of redemption and the healing power of family.